Hey guys, happy Monday. I hope everyone had an awesome weekend. I'm hopping on today to talk about this message from A Course in Miracles. So I've been a student and I'm starting to teach more and more about A Course in Miracles. And I recently just joined a local study group. And I really love these principles. I know there's moments in your life when you see something, you hear something, and while you're learning about it, you just can feel this change in your life. You can, those moments where you feel like this is something amazing, this is something that's going to change the course of my life forever. So, hi Tina, thanks so much for joining. That is how I feel when I read or listen to or hear someone else talk about A Course in Miracles. So, I'm really following this feeling, I'm following my joy, and I'm going to teach more and more. Tina says hi, more and more about the Course in Miracles and some of the lessons and how I perceive them and how I want to teach about them. So I thought that this was a great lesson or a great point to start out with, the question of would I rather be right or happy? And what does that mean in terms of A Course in Miracles? What does the Course teach about this principle? So would I rather be happy or right? Would I rather be right or happy? So our ego, there's two different parts of ourselves. There's the ego. That's the ego is kind of this part of ourselves that we've created, that we've perceived through our mind. It's that voice that always speaks first and loudest. It's often very critical. It's hard on ourselves. It's judgmental of yourself and other people. And then there's this other voice, this what the Course calls your internal teacher. That's the voice of your intuition, the voice of your truth. I believe it's kind of your connection to the divine. So it's your sort of the part of God inside of you. And the more that you listen to this voice, the voice of your intuition, and learn to tune out, or not necessarily tune out, but the more that you can acknowledge and tell the difference between your ego and your intuition, the more that you can begin to change your life. So the Course talks about the holy instant. The holy instant is when you shift your perception from fear to love. And that's what A Course refers to as a miracle. So the miracle is just a shift in perception. It's a shift in perception when you can notice that you're being in your ego and you ask the Holy Spirit, you ask your internal teacher to guide you back to the voice of love, the voice of your truth. So this question, would you rather be happy or would you rather be right? So being right is so much of the ego. The ego wants to be right. The ego wants to be heard. The ego believes that its way of thinking is the only way of thinking. But that reminder of would you rather be right or happy? So when you are listening to someone and you see a different point of view, your ego wants to be right, but your soul wants to be happy. Your intuition, your inner guide, your inner teacher wants to be happy. So my hope is that next time maybe you're in this situation where you don't see someone else's point of view, or when you want to just get the last word in, or you don't want to listen to someone who maybe has something that you do really need to hear, but your ego doesn't want to hear it. Your ego wants to prove they're right. Your ego wants to have the upper hand. Your ego wants to know that what you say matters. Hi, Anne. Thanks so much for joining. Maybe you just tune back in and ask yourself that question. And by trying to be right, by trying to prove my way is the best way, am I interfering with my happiness? And in those moments, that's when you ask for the miracle. That's when you ask for the Holy Spirit to help you shift your perception, to help you overcome these fearful thoughts, and to remember the essence of who you really are, to come back home, to come back to that place of love. So that is the miracle. The miracle is any time that you are maybe fighting with your spouse, and when you just maybe remember that question, would I rather be happy or would I rather be right? And you remember that and you ask the Holy Spirit, you ask, help me shift my perception. Or, one of my favorite prayers that I learned in this book, I think it was called The Only Little Prayer You Ever Need, is please heal my fear-based thoughts. So when you ask to be healed, when you ask to return your fear-based thoughts to loving thoughts, that is the miracle. That is when you have that shift of perception. That is when you can get out of your own way and allow your inner truth to speak through you. And the miracle is when you are maybe having a fight with your spouse and you hear that little voice that says, would you rather be happy or right? And you remind yourself that I am in the ego, and the ego is not who I really am. The ego is something that I made up. It's something that I've perceived in my own mind. And then I can return my thoughts back to love and maybe listen or lean in and have a shift in perception and be able to hear someone and know that you don't always have to be right, that you can be happy, because the ego just wants to be right. The ego wants to prove its point. The ego wants to be heard. The ego wants to be seen. But reminding yourself that by being seen, by being heard, by trying to prove I'm right, am I interfering with my inner peace? Am I forgetting who I really am? It's one of the ego's tricks. One of the ego's tricks is to perceive a fearful world. But you can always come back to that loving world. You can always come back to that inner voice, that inner truth, that inner whisper. And it's simply by asking help. Maybe that's as simple as, please heal my fear-based thoughts. Help me remember love. I want to be happy. Those simple requests, those simple thoughts, when you turn those thoughts over to the Holy Spirit, and when you allow the Holy Spirit to help you shift your perceptions from fear back to love, that is the miracle. That is what the teachings of the Course in Miracles are all about. That we create the ego in our mind. We create this perception of ourself, and at any time we can change these external perceptions to change our external world. So change our internal perceptions to change our external world. So I hope that the teaching was helpful today. Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for joining. But what I really hope for you to take away from this is just that at any time you can change your perceptions. At any time you can change your thoughts. And when you notice yourself in your ego, when you notice your ego wanting to be heard, wanting to be seen, wanting to prove that it's right at any cost, to remind yourself, hi Logan, thanks so much for joining, that there is a better way. There is a better way of living. There is a better way of feeling. And when you allow yourself in the middle of this ego thinking to remind yourself of who you really are, a child of God, the voice of love, you have this inspiration, you have this intuition inside of you. And when you tune into it, so maybe you're in a fight, maybe you're really angry with someone, maybe you're having a hard time really seeing someone else's point of view or perception, just coming back to this simple question, would I rather be happy or would I rather be right? So if proving that I'm right, does that interfere with my happiness? Does that interfere with me having a good day? Does that interfere with how I feel? And I know the ego will play these tricks on you that I've taken a lot from this. Thank you. Oh, you're so welcome, Anne. So the ego will play tricks on you. It will make you believe that, I'm right. I proved my point. I got the last word in. But do you ever really, it maybe is that temporary, like, ooh, yay, I proved my point, or I did this, but it's not this happiness that can really fulfill you. It's an ego happiness. It's an ego temporary happiness. And then after you prove your point, or after you maybe put someone else down to make your voice heard, it doesn't feel good. And your intuition, your soul knows that that's not really the truth of who you are. It's just this persona and this, I guess this part of you that you've made up in your own mind. But remembering that at any time, no matter how far and how long and wide the ego has kind of overtaken, you can always come back home. You can always come back to the truth of who you really are, which is love. And that is what the Course's teachings are all about. It's undoing these fearful perceptions and beliefs that the ego has portrayed in your life, and it is remembering love. So love is who we are. Love is what we are made of. And the more that we tune into love, the more our lives will change. And I'm sure you've had experiences where your ego has overtaken, where you've had to prove you were right, you had to get the last word in. And then you've had instances where you maybe heard that little internal voice that said, listen, maybe this person has something that you need to hear. And when you shift your perception, away from the fearful thoughts and world and things that you've created, and tune into that voice of love, that is the miracle. The miracle is simply this shift in perception, detouring away from fear and remembering love. So that's a little takeaway from the course that I wanted to share today. And again, I really love A Course in Miracles, and the teachings have made such an impact on my life. And I've just been feeling this feeling of when I read about the course, or I listen to other teachers talk about the course, just, yes, this is something that I really need to teach about, because the messages really need to be heard. So I hope that today's message was helpful for you. Anne said she's taken a lot away from today's message. So thank you, Anne. But thank you, Tina, and thank you, Susan and Logan and everyone else who tuned in today. And if you're seeing this message later, that I hope it resonates with you. Tina says, I needed this today. Thank you, Tina. And I really needed this message today myself as well. And it actually kind of relates a lot to the message that I got in church on Sunday, which was all about leaning in to, sometimes those conversations that are uncomfortable, or that feedback that we don't always like to hear. And I thought that message related so much to this. And I really experienced this sort of miracle in my own life today, when there was a time today when someone gave me feedback of how I could improve in my life and in one of my relationships. And, my first instinct was so much of the ego of, I want to prove I'm right. I want to get the last word in. This isn't like, I don't believe this, or prove that I was wrong. But when I really allowed myself to listen and hear the message, that's really the miracle, because feedback, so often there is a little bit of truth in it, if not a lot of bit of truth. And when we're open to hearing it through the voice of our soul, not the voice of our ego that wants to fight back, that wants to resist, that wants to prove that the other person is wrong. But there really is so much learning experience and so much positivity that can come from a little bit of feedback, or a little bit of just being able to hear someone else, to see someone else, to say, I see you, I hear you, and I understand you. And that is of the soul. That is your intuition. And, your ego wants nothing to do with that. It never wants to hear feedback. It wants to think that you're perfect and you don't need to change in any way. But, so that was kind of the miracle moment that I had today. And I don't think I would have been able to have that if I hadn't have let that other voice, that softer, gentler whisper, tune in and remind me that this was something that I needed to hear, and to not get defensive, but to hear it and to understand it, to take it in, and then allow myself to take the steps needed to become a better version of myself. Because truthfully, I think that's all that we all want to do, is to be the best versions of ourselves. And the more that we can understand and recognize the ego's games and the ego's point of view coming out, the more we can recognize that when we tune into the voice of our soul, when we tune into that other voice, that voice that is the connection to the divine, that we can live a completely different life, a life based on love versus a life based on fear. So I hope everyone has an awesome day. And hi, Gretchen. Thanks for joining. And Tina, thank you so much for your feedback. And I can't wait to hop on and share more principles from A Course in Miracles. I'll talk to you guys all soon. Bye-bye.